The baby had no mother. She gave her life bringing him into the world, and from the moment he took his first breath, he cried. Doctors came, specialists tried, machines hummed and beeped, but nothing could calm him. His father, a man the world respected, stood by the crib broken, rich in money, but poor in answers, and when all hope seemed lost, God sent someone, not from a hospital, not from a book, but from the laundry room, a quiet maid with nothing to offer, except the one thing the baby truly needed, love. The kind that comes from heaven. The Baker mansion was still, not peaceful, just quiet. Heavy, quiet. On the top floor, the nursery was full of sound. Baby Adrian cried like his tiny heart was breaking. His face was red. His body shook. His lungs worked harder than any machine in that house. It had been like this for days. The mother was gone. She passed during childbirth, and now her baby cried, not for milk, not for medicine, but for something no one in that room could give. One by one, the experts left. They used words like colic, trauma, overstimulation, but nothing helped. The nurses were tired. The specialists gave up. And Andrew Baker, the billionaire who built empires, could only stand there, watching his son suffer. He had power, he had people, but he didn't have peace, and neither did his child. Downstairs in the laundry room, Florence Brown was folding towels. She was new, 27, no title, no fancy degree, just quiet hands, a soft heart, and a memory, because when she heard that baby cry, something deep inside her moved. She had heard that cry before, years ago, when she held her baby brother through the night. She paused, looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Lord, should I go?" She didn't wait for a sign. Sometimes God speaks in a sound you can't ignore, and that baby's cry was louder than fear. Florence walked upstairs, slow but steady. When she reached the nursery, the door was open. Everyone turned. She saw a man at the edge of himself, and a baby who just wanted to be held. Florence took a breath and said gently, "Sir, may I try?" The head nurse stepped forward. "She's just the maid." But Andrew Baker didn't speak. He just looked at his son, then looked at Florence, and nodded. What happened next was not planned by doctors. It was placed by God. Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story reminds you that love always finds its way, especially when heaven is watching. Florence stepped into the room, slowly, gently, as if every inch of that nursery was sacred ground. Her shoes didn't make a sound against the polished floor. All eyes followed her, confused, uncertain. The nurses stood frozen. The head specialist shifted awkwardly near the crib, but no one said a word. Baby Adrian was still crying, his tiny chest rising and falling too fast, his face flushed, his hands curled into tired fists. Florence didn't rush. She moved like she had been here before, like she had walked through storms like this. She leaned over the crib, her eyes soft. She whispered something only the baby could hear. Then she reached down, arm steady, heart full, and lifted him into her arms. And he was lighter than she expected. So small, so tense. She held him close, chest to chest, as if she'd known him her whole life. And then she began to hum. Not a lullaby from the radio, not something from a children's book, but an old song. A tune passed down from her grandmother, a melody woven through grief and comfort, sorrow and healing. Adrian's body jerked, just once, then slowly. The crying began to fade, one breath at a time, from wild sobs to soft whimpers to silence. The room held its breath. Andrew Baker blinked, his lips slightly parted, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. For 3 weeks, nothing had worked. Not the money, not the methods. But now, his son was resting. Peace had come in the arms of a stranger. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. He looked away quickly, but Florence saw them. She didn't speak. She just kept humming, her body gently swaying, her cheek resting against the crown of the baby's head. Behind her, the head nurse stepped forward. "She's had her moment," the woman said, her voice clipped. "Give him back." But Andrew's voice came first. "No." It was quiet, but firm. "She stays." Florence didn't look up. She just shifted her weight slightly and held the baby closer, as if God had placed him in her arms. And no one, not now, was going to take him away. The room was still. Adrian's breathing had slowed. One tiny hand rested against Florence's collar. His fingers curled into the fabric like he had finally found something solid in a world that had only felt loud and cold. She kept humming, low, steady, warm. The old melody rose and fell like waves, a song her grandmother once sang on nights when the power went out, when the world outside was too dark and the pain inside was too much. She hadn't sung it in years, but now the words came back without asking. "Hold on, little one, and the light always finds you." Adrian shifted slightly in her arms. His mouth opened, then closed, like he was sighing, not from hunger or pain, but from rest. One of the younger nurses near the wall blinked hard. She looked down, then quietly stepped back. No one knew what to say. Even the machines around them, the monitors, the soft beeping from the corner, felt quieter now, as if they too were listening. Andrew didn't move. His hands hung at his sides, useless, but something in his chest was cracking, slowly, gently. "How did you do that?" he asked. His voice wasn't sharp like before. It was softer now, tired. "I didn't," Florence said quietly. She rocked the baby a little more, then added, "Sometimes. A child doesn't need to be fixed. He just needs to feel safe." Andrew looked at her, really looked, not as a maid, not as staff, but as a woman standing in a space she didn't ask to enter, yet somehow belonged. "You've done this before?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "My baby brother. He used to cry like this for hours." Her eyes stayed on Adrian. "Mama wasn't around much. Grandma raised us. She taught me to listen with my heart, not just my ears." The head nurse cleared her throat, but didn't speak. Her arms were crossed now, tightly. Andrew caught the tension but ignored it. He stepped closer. "So, what now?" Florence didn't answer right away. She looked down at the baby in her arms. His eyes were closed. His mouth twitched, like he was dreaming. "Now," she said, "we let him rest. No more passing hands. No more noise. Just quiet. And someone who stays." Andrew nodded. He didn't say thank you. Not yet. But something in his eyes softened. And in the soft hum of a grandmother's song, a silent vow began to form. This child would not cry alone again. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Adrian rested in Florence's arms, breathing slow and even. The cries that had filled the house, the cries no one could stop, were gone now. The stillness was thick, holy almost, but peace doesn't always sit well with pride. The head nurse stepped forward. Her shoes clicked against the hardwood too loud. She folded her hands in front of her. "Sir," she said carefully, "I understand she meant well, but this isn't protocol." Andrew didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on his son. "You've all had 3 weeks," he said softly. "She's had 3 minutes." The nurse's lips pressed into a thin line. Florence didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. The child in her arms was the only answer that mattered. But she spoke anyway. Her voice was steady, not sharp. "He's not sick," she said. "He's just overwhelmed." The room shifted. A few of the nurses glanced at one another. The pediatrician frowned but said nothing. "Too many hands, too much light, too many sounds," she continued. "He's trying to tell you, but no one's been listening." Andrew's eyes flicked to hers. "Listening? Babies speak," Florence said, "before they ever say a word, with their breath, their tension, the way they cry." She looked down at Adrian. Her hand brushed gently over his back. "This one, He's been asking for peace, not pressure. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid, full of questions no one had asked before. "Where did you learn this?" Andrew asked quietly. Florence hesitated, not out of fear but from the weight of memory. "My grandmother raised me," she said, "and my baby brother. She used to say, if your heart isn't calm, your hands can't help." A soft cough came from the pediatrician near the window. He adjusted his glasses, his face unreadable. Florence didn't flinch. "I'm not trained like you," she said gently. "I just know what I've lived." Andrew exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Adrian gave a small sigh in her arms. Not a cry, not a gasp. Just peace. Andrew looked around at the room, the quiet machines, the tired eyes, the walls that had heard too much. Then he looked at Florence. "Stay," he said again, this time not as a request. "Stay until he sleeps." Florence nodded, and for the first time since the funeral, the house began to breathe again. The house was quieter than it had been in weeks, not just on the outside, in the halls or the rooms, but on the inside too, inside the walls where grief still lived, inside a father who had run out of ways to fix things, and now inside a tiny child, finally asleep. Florence sat in a rocking chair near the crib. Adrian lay against her chest, completely still. One small hand had slipped under her collar. She didn't move, didn't even breathe too deep. Sometimes peace is so fragile, you're scared to touch it. The others had left, one by one. The nurses, the specialists, the shadows. Andrew had stayed for a while, standing by the window, watching, but he hadn't said much. Only once did he whisper something under his breath. Florence hadn't heard the words, but the way he said them sounded more like prayer than speech. Now, hours later, the house had gone dim. In the kitchen, Florence stood alone by the sink. She had just finished rinsing bottles and drying her hands on the edge of her uniform. The night was still, until she heard the soft creak of a floorboard behind her. She didn't turn. Somehow, she already knew who it was. Andrew stood in the doorway, suit jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, tie loosened like he'd forgotten it was still on. He looked tired, but more than that, he looked unsure. For a man who made global decisions before breakfast, silence didn't come easy. But tonight, he let it linger. Florence placed a clean bottle in the drying rack and finally turned to face him. Their eyes met and held. He took a breath. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did." She nodded. He just needed someone to hold him. A beat passed. "No," Andrew said. "He needed her, but she's gone, and I—" He stopped. His voice caught somewhere between his chest and throat. Florence didn't fill the silence. She let it stay. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the arms don't have to match the name, just the love." Andrew looked down, then up again. "Would you stay?" he asked. His tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't confident either. "With Adrian, I mean, not just tonight." Florence hesitated. "I'm just the maid," she said. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "Tonight, you were something else." The space between them held a quiet truth, not fully seen, not yet spoken, but something had shifted, and neither of them could unfeel it. The next morning came soft. Pale light slipped through the nursery windows like a whisper. Florence sat by the crib, her hand resting on the railing. Adrian was asleep again, deep, calm, wrapped in stillness. Her body was tired, but her heart, it was wide awake. She looked down at the baby's face. He looked different now. Not because anything outside had changed, but because peace had touched him. She leaned her head against the chair, and for a moment, let herself remember. 10 years ago, a cracked window, a rusted sink, a crying child in the next room. Florence had been 17. Her mother was gone by then, not from death, but from something slower. Addiction, anger, distance. Her baby brother had only been 2, and he cried every night, not because he was hurt, but because he was alone. Florence would wrap him in a towel, it was all they had clean some nights, and rock him on her lap. "You're safe now," she'd whisper. I got you, I got you." She didn't have a plan back then, only love. She worked part-time at a diner after school, cleaned apartments on weekends. She gave up college, gave up sleep, gave up her own growing up, just to hold on to the only family she had left. People told her she was wasting time, but she knew better, because love isn't a waste. It's the seed that saves people. She blinked slowly, pulled from the memory as Adrian stirred. A knock came at the door. It was Andrew, shirt pressed, hair wet, but his eyes still carried yesterday's weight. "You stayed the night," he said. "He needed someone," Florence replied. He stepped in, slower this time. "You're not like anyone I've met." She didn't know if it was a compliment or a question, but he sat down across from her, not as a boss, not as a billionaire, just a father. "Where did you learn to do what you do?" Florence looked at him for a long moment. "Pain," she said. The word sat between them, heavy but honest. She looked back at Adrian, sleeping soundly. "Pain taught me how to listen. Love taught me how to stay." Andrew swallowed hard. He didn't answer right away. But something in his posture changed, like a man starting to see the world for the first time, through someone else's eyes. The nursery had changed, not in how it looked, but in how it felt. Softer now, slower. Like the walls had exhaled. Adrian was different too. He still cried sometimes, but less. And when he did, it wasn't the panicked scream it used to be. It was a sound that asked for comfort, not rescue. And Florence was there to give it. She hadn't gone back to folding laundry. She hadn't returned to mopping floors. Andrew asked her to stay close, to Adrian, and to him. "I want you near the nursery," he'd said. "All day if you can." She had nodded, unsure what this meant, but she said yes, because deep down, she knew this wasn't just a child needing help. It was a home trying to find its heart again. But not everyone welcomed the shift. One morning, as Florence carried Adrian into the sunroom, swaddled and drowsy, she heard the whispers. 2 staff members, kitchen side. They didn't see her coming. "She's a maid. What's she doing upstairs?" You'd think she gave birth to him. She's just taking advantage. At her. Grief makes men blind. Florence stopped just out of sight. She didn't speak, didn't confront, but the words lodged somewhere deep, not in her pride, but in the place where doubt likes to hide. That evening she stood by the crib, rocking Adrian with slow movements. Her hands were steady, but her heart felt heavier. She didn't hear Andrew come in, but he stood behind her, watching her shoulders rise and fall. "You okay?" he asked. She turned slowly. "You said you wanted me here," she said, her voice quiet, "but I don't think everyone agrees." Andrew didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He walked closer, looking down at Adrian, now fast asleep. "You're not here for them," he said. "You're here because he sleeps in your arm, and nowhere else." Florence nodded, but her eyes said something else. "It's hard to feel welcome where you were never meant to be." Andrew didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, "Maybe this house was built wrong. Maybe it's time to change that." His voice didn't shake, but hers almost did. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. He looked at her, not as staff, not as help, just as someone who saw what others missed. "I do now," he said. And in that still moment something shifted again, not loudly, but enough to be felt. The house was quiet that night, not just still, but quiet in a way that felt different, like something had been set down, like something no one knew they were carrying had been put away, just for a moment. Florence sat in the dim kitchen again, her hands resting in her lap. The bottles were already washed, the counters clean. But she didn't move. She just sat in the silence. Her thoughts were slow and wide. She was starting to care too much, and she knew it. But how do you not care when a child finds peace in your arms, when a home so full of grief starts to breathe again the moment you walk through the door? She knew her place. She just wasn't sure it was the same anymore. Footsteps came softly down the hall. Andrew. No suit tonight. Just a sweatshirt and worn-in jeans. The kind that said he wasn't trying to be anyone right now. He paused in the doorway. "He's sleeping," Florence nodded. "Like the world's finally quiet." He offered a small smile, but it didn't reach all the way. He stepped into the room, pulled out a chair, sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the corner. "You changed him," Andrew said. Florence looked up. "No," she replied. "I think I just saw him." He watched her for a long moment. "I've been in boardrooms with scientists, teams of engineers, but no one in that room could do what you did. It wasn't special," she said. "It was just love, quiet love." "That is special," Andrew replied. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table. "What's this?" "A job offer," he said simply. Florence didn't touch it. "I'm a maid," she whispered. "No," Andrew said gently. "You're the only one who's heard my son's heart. That's a gift. I want to build something around that, a place where people like you can help people like him." She stared at the folder. She wasn't ready. But something inside her stirred anyway. A question, a whisper, a calling. She looked at Andrew, unsure, afraid. "I didn't even finish college," he nodded. "You finished something better," he said. "You finished the cry no one else could." And in the quiet that followed, she didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Florence stepped out. She wore a plain navy dress, nothing fancy, no designer name, but she stood straight. Because when you walk in with purpose, you don't need polish. The front desk paused mid-sentence. Two assistants looked up from their screens. They didn't recognize her, not yet. She was no longer holding a mop. She was here for something else now. Upstairs, the room was already full. Engineers, designers, developers, all waiting for the presentation Andrew Baker had promised would change the direction of their company. They expected a specialist, a consultant. But when Florence walked in, the room shifted. Quiet confusion. Quick glances. Some of them had seen her in the mansion, cleaning, carrying laundry. But today she walked in like she had something to say. Andrew stood near the back, arms crossed, watching. He didn't speak. This was her moment. Florence stepped to the front. Her hands weren't shaking, but her heart was loud in her chest. No slideshow, no charts, just her. She looked around the room. "I'm not here to teach you science," she said. "You already know it. I'm here to talk about what you can't measure." A pause, the air thick. "I've held a child who wouldn't stop crying. Not because he was sick, but because he was unseen." A few engineers shifted in their seats. "You can build the smartest crib in the world, but if a baby doesn't feel safe, it's just noise." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because truth doesn't shout. It lands. "Babies speak in silence," she said, in breath, in tension, in the space between their cries. "The question is, are we listening?" The room was still. One man near the back lowered his pen. A woman near the screen blinked too fast. Florence looked down. "I'm not a scientist," she said, "but I know what it means to be a child who just needed someone to stay." She looked up, not seeking applause, just letting it rest. Andrew met her eyes, not with pride, but with gratitude. Because in that moment she wasn't just Florence the maid. She was Florence. The voice that had turned a cry into calm. And this was only the beginning. The sun was soft that morning. It poured through the glass walls of the Baker Innovations Wellness Center like light had found its way home. Inside, a group of new parents sat in a quiet circle, holding babies wrapped in soft blankets. Florence stood at the center, not with a clipboard or a microphone, but with Adrian in her arms. He was heavier now, bigger, but still peaceful, the same way he had been that night when she first held him. She swayed gently as she spoke. "They don't ask for much," she said. "They just want to know they're not alone." The room listened, really listened. One father held his child closer. A mother wiped her eyes. "You don't have to be perfect," Florence continued. "You just have to be present." At the back of the room, Andrew stood in the doorway. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. And as he watched her hold his son, not as a stranger, not as staff, but as someone who had given both of them something no money ever could, he felt it again. That shift, the quiet breaking of something hard, so that something soft could grow. Adrian let out a small sound, not a cry, not discomfort, just a hum, like he was singing along to the rhythm of her breath. Florence smiled down at him. "He's getting heavier," she said softly. Andrew stepped closer. "He's getting happier," he replied. Their eyes met, and this time nothing needed to be explained. Not the job, not the past, not the strange way their lives had collided in the middle of grief. It all made sense now. Not because it was planned, but because it was placed, by hands they couldn't see. Adrian rested his head on Florence's shoulder. Safe, still, whole. And as the workshop ended and the parents began to rise, Andrew remained where he stood. Quiet, grateful. He had built systems, cities, companies. But here he had learned something bigger. Not how to lead, not how to win, but how to listen. Truly listen. And all because one woman refused to walk past a crying child and chose to stay. Some stories aren't just told, they're felt. If this one moved you, if it stirred something quiet in your heart, then you're in the right place. Because here at Elevated Heart Stories, we don't just share moments. We share the ones that change people. Stories of love that doesn't give up, of grace in ordinary hands, of how God shows up in places we least expect, through people we might have walked right past. So if your heart was lifted today, stay, subscribe, be part of this family, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Because no matter where you are, you belong here. You are seen, you are loved, and you are never, ever alone. This is Elevated Heart Stories, where love always finds a way home. As A.